gathered some of the best, if not the best, and we recognize their expertise in the other allied professions and, of course, in architecture. With that, may I have the honors of introducing our first speaker? Our first speaker, when I was interviewing, of course, some of you might have the invitation or the program, but I'll have a separate introduction for her. She was a graduate of, she went to Wesley University, where I want to mention this because she was a schoolmate of Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright. And then subsequently, she went to Stanford University for architecture and Princeton University. She is a well-known expert architect, landscape architect, and a planner with over 45 years of experience on large-scale civic, transportation, and infrastructure projects. She is internationally recognized for her skills in programming, conceptual design, and implementation strategies. She facilitates sustainable design solutions which address aesthetic and practical concern, blending architecture, landscape and civil engineering, landscape and of course, landscape architecture. She's an expert with natural resource management, waterfront, and mobility-oriented development. And she will talk about some of the current projects she's doing in Malaysia and in various parts of Asia. And she was, of course, she's a part of the RTKL, the famous RTKL group. And she used also to be part of the Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, or formerly, we commonly know as SOM. May I have the honors of presenting architect Diane Legge Kemp.
Good morning. I have really enjoyed my time here. You probably noticed last night. Compared to the American Architects conventions, you really know how to party. This morning, I need the slide to come up. Do you see it? Do I need to do something? Moving places? There it is. Yesterday afternoon, I put this cover slide in. Little did I know that it would be so difficult to be moving this morning, but I'm glad to see you all here. I want to talk about mobility, and mobility, of course, like many, many issues, is critical to the urbanization of our world. I think you've probably seen this slide before. 70% of the world's population is going to be living in cities by 2050. And by the way, 50% of that population will be living in coastal cities. So we not only have mobility issues, we have resiliency issues, we have regeneration in our older cities, and of course we have wellness. These are the themes for us as architects to be embracing as we go into the future with our design work. I believe that mobility is fundamental to urbanization. Actually, I think it's the only thing that really matters. It's about connecting people, ideas, culture, and commerce. And I think you've probably experienced here in Manila during the traffic jams yesterday and the others that I've experienced, how important it is to be able to easily move around your cities. So mobility really is access to opportunity, to jobs, to markets, to housing and education, healthcare, human services, culture and recreation, creativity and innovation. So mobility connects lives, and it's critical for us as architects to see this as an opportunity to invest in mobility. and its economic, social, and environmental benefits at not only a site level, but at a community, a city, and a national level. So mobility-oriented development, or what I call MODE, has kind of two ways of thinking about it. Mobility-oriented development and mobility-oriented design. I'm going to talk about development first because that encompasses the social, economic, and development aspects that we need to focus on. So as we all consider sustainability in its various forms, it's basically the intersection of social desired outcomes, economic desired outcomes, and environmental desired outcomes. That's the sweet spot that we as architects and planners need to shoot for in our projects. MODE considers development benefits. And these are very small, but land use plans for 4 stations in Malaysia that we looked at. I know most of you are architects, so you might not be used to seeing land use plans like this. The purple is industry, the blue is office, the kind of beige color is housing, yellow is transportation at the center. The critical thing about mobility-oriented development is that it's a mix of uses and that it unlocks opportunities for industry development, job creation, and affordable housing. MODE also considers the social benefits of transportation. Transportation just cannot be built in isolation. It must be fully integrated. And so as we think about transportation and mobility as architects, we need to be thinking about training, jobs, human services, housing, and so on. For not only the people that will use the transit, but those who will benefit by its presence. And mobility-oriented development calculates the economic benefits of the presence of transit. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when I show the Malaysia example. But one of the things we have found that if you plan early when alignments and stations are just being thought about, and you plan early enough so as architects and planners, our ideas can be incorporated, we are able to then calculate the amount of money that can be invested in a community, the economic expansion of industry clusters that may be present, the increase in GDP, household prosperity, and the number of permanent jobs that can be created. This is powerful stuff. This is the way to convince our governments and our nations to invest in mobility and to do it now and not when we're completely congested. I believe that having MODE with these 3 components, social, environmental, and economic, not only allows a developer to be competitive in obtaining a piece of property, but it allows government to help sell the story, to tell the need for investment in mobility and transportation. So mobility-oriented development MODE is about delivering that value of mobility. Now, some of you might know the TOD, and some of you might not, but TOD was designed basically in the United States. It's transit-oriented development, and it was designed basically to induce ridership, to reduce driving, increase walking and biking, add convenience, but above all, increase density around transportation. It's great, but it only encourages the use of transit. Here in Asia, in many countries, people are already transit users. So transit-oriented development doesn't quite make sense. So what MODE does is looks at sustaining ridership, discouraging driving. You can own a car, but just don't drive it every day. Make walking and biking safe, support the conveniences that should be around transit, and make density more livable. So mode is about building multimodal choices of transport. These are important things for us to consider. So station areas without mode, they're just train stations. And I should say here that it could be an airport, a bus station, or a ferry terminal. Mode works with any form of transportation. But if you don't plan ahead and think about all of these factors together, these stations are attractive but utilitarian. Sometimes they're very isolated from the communities, either elevated, they're subterranean, or surrounded by roadways. Definitely car-oriented, and really a deterrent or barrier to future development. But station areas with a mobility-oriented development focus are more than just a train station. It's a set of existing and planned land uses that inform the design, natural and cultural resources that can be captured, and a focus on connecting to communities of development. So in this case, then, stations are a connector. But even more than that, more than being just a connector, these places respond to community aspirations. They respond to markets. They open the doors to ideas for different kinds of development and target a mix of uses that deliver desired outcomes within a community. So mode is an opportunity gateway. I'm going to take a minute. This is the only animation I have here. No more dancing girls at the moment. This is the project that we worked on in Malaysia for SPAD. It's scrubbed with the references to Malaysia because only recently we were able to talk about this phenomenal experience we had a year ago, where a team of us from RTKL and the Arcadis family of companies worked in the offices of SPAD, the National Transport Agency of Malaysia. We shared costing, business case, economic development, social analysis, as well as design around the table to look at what would be possible for Malaysia high-speed rail. This is a line that's planned between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, a total of 8 stations. And what we did is looked at it from how to create a sustainable access to economies with high-speed rail. And it was on an embankment or elevated, so it's not down to earth, so to speak. We looked at how to integrate economic activity with social benefits, and then measure this, predict this in terms of GDP, life expectancy, literacy, and levels of job employment. So the kinds of things that we tend to look at in this kind of analysis are things like, as an architect, how do I decide what to put on a piece of land? I know sometimes we're very reliant on our clients to tell us, but in my experience, sometimes they don't actually quite know. And that's up to us to help them think this through. How do I know, how do we know what enabling infrastructure is going to be necessary around these sites to make development actually happen? How do we skill up the local population to be able to take the jobs that are created by the presence of transit? How do we encourage innovation and development of investment, foreign or otherwise, to come to a community? How do we relieve traffic congestion in and around the sites that we're working? And lastly, how do we support a poverty alleviation, educational disadvantage, and social welfare as part of our projects? These are charges that we as architects need to keep in mind, and I think we try to. It's our corporal body social responsibility to be thinking about these issues, even if you're just working on a house or a shopping mall or an office building. We are the ones that can make the difference in our communities, our states, and our nations. So the socioeconomic development analytics are the underpinning of mode, because generally development may happen simultaneously or conveniently. And then we are the beneficiaries, the negative beneficiaries of traffic congestion, things in the wrong place, etc. When we master plan a city or community, we have the benefit then of integrating transportation and land use. But when we put on top of that a socioeconomic focus with an environment and physical planning component, we now have the ability to achieve much greater outcomes for the communities in which transit occurs. One of the things we found in Malaysia when we did finally the calculations is the revenue streams created by property development around the stations, and SBAD could participate as a developer in those. The revenue streams created by that development or the sale of development rights effectively pays for the transit stations. So I know normally government says, oh, it's so expensive to build transit. Yes, it is. But if you think about it in a holistic way, if government thinks about it in a holistic way, and the private sector, we can afford to build transit in all of our communities. In fact, we can't afford not to do it, because traffic congestion is just going to stop economy and economic growth and social prosperity. So this high-speed rail project in Malaysia, we started working on it with the sort of premise that, well, if you build high-speed rail, development will happen. But actually it doesn't. We've done research in all of the countries that have high-speed rail, and unless you plan it early at the time that alignments and station locations are being set up, development does not happen. It doesn't automatically happen. In France, the Lille station is the only one where development happened before 20 years of service for high-speed rail. So we have to insert ourselves. I know we're architects and we think we do buildings, but we design environments. We have to get into this discussion earlier to make a difference with our engineering colleagues. And as we looked in Malaysia, we identified the national outcomes that Malaysia wants as part of a country emerging. Infrastructure is a great way to take a country from third world and up the food chain. But in Malaysia, they're looking for increased participation of women in the workforce. They're looking for affordable housing to give access to jobs and to provide the training for those things. At the same time, we also looked at the individual profiles of the people that would use transit and those that would benefit from being near transit, and I mentioned that before. The key thing here is that each destination, each station on the Malaysia line has its own unique character. You cannot build a line of, say, train, high-speed rail, it could be commuter rail, light rail, and assume that every station is the same, or every station area, station community is the same. They are not. Each is different. And as we did the analyses, we found that some were tourism gateways. One would be a healthcare center, others high-tech electronic park because of proximity to an airport, or a residential community of affordable housing near to Singapore. So if you keep that in mind as you work in these communities, we're able to bring social, economic, environmental, development, analytics together to create a high-speed rail, in this case, system, and a mobility-oriented development strategy that unlocks the full value of those communities. And lastly, many of you probably work with developers. The key thing is predictability and certainty. Even stakeholders, when you're on the other side of the table and something's being proposed in your community, you want to make sure it's done right, and then you can be certain that it will be done right as it's executed. So by using a socioeconomic development analytics, we're able to predict and make certain the future so that investment is possible and encouraged. So in the case of Malaysia, connecting people, ideas, culture, and commerce got the attention of the Prime Minister's office kind of by accident. Government officials like a good story. They like something that is beneficial to their people. So MODE will transform the locations of those stations into destinations and spur development around them. Without MODE, the country's high-speed rail system would be a great railway. But with MODE, it's going to be a country that has a great plan for creating a better tomorrow. So transportation linked to national goals, community goals, and city goals is something that we have to focus on as architects. Lastly, I'll talk about MODE, but mobility-oriented design. There are lots of things that we do to make these developments work. In stations, now whether it's bus, airport, ferry terminals, in stations we're incorporating convenience, goods, retail, personal services, trade and exposition, entertainment, education, healthcare, and culture. Yeah, I said that, but actually in China they haven't quite done it yet, but we keep trying to get them to incorporate those in the stations. At the stations, we understand again that each station area is different. Some of them are downtown CBDs, some are residential, some are employment centers, intermodal hubs, or special uses like education. So again, each station needs to be designed for the industry and the economy it's shooting for. And of course, around the stations, we try to make a good mix of uses. Offices, so you can live and work. Education, so you could live, work, and learn. Culture, sports, shopping, even government. But I think the key difference between TOD and MODE is that it's a larger picture. It's beyond the stations. This is on the left is a project we did in Sanya, where it was an existing station, but we added hotel, exhibition facilities, cultural facilities, and a new government center right around the station. Otherwise, it would have been out in a green field. So it is beyond the stations that we need to be looking and doing our part as architects and planners. And we need to do this in existing places. Not all stations are going to be new. This is in Spain, where we went back and converted the old train station into a mixed-use retail hub and reconstructed the rail functions on a lower level. Here in Sanya, again, the existing station with additions to it. So adaptively reusing some of the buildings and infilling with new. Some of the stations we work with are completely new places. On the left in Beijing, on the right in Spain again. What we do is identify the local user needs, respond to local markets, and make retail, if it's there, market-driven, not retail-driven. I always think about mobility-oriented design as following the flow. If If you're trying to get people from where they live to a station, figure out what the natural flow would be, as the crow flies, as we say in the U.S., and then fill in along the flow. Design your plans, your architecture to facilitate people's easy movement between one place and another. Link modes closely. This is a station we worked on in Shanghai, where the maglev is located. It's very important to link rail, bus, taxi, cars, bikes, and pedestrians closely, not separated too far apart, because then people won't make the transfer. Make them close together. And scale to walking. I was surprised here. I was expecting the weather to be unbearable, to be honest, and it's quite lovely. But it might be that I'm living in Hong Kong now long enough, so I'm getting used to humidity and heat. It's not too hot to walk, and it's good for us. So make sure you design the development you work on so that it's easy for people to walk and it's safe for them to do so. Mix the uses, I said this before, and provide needed goods and services. And I think here's something I see in China. Every shopping mall wants to have Prada and all of the luxury brands. But that's not what everybody needs, certainly not on a daily basis. So we can influence our developer clients to think about incorporating what people really need in these environments so that, one, they're successful, and two, it's good for the communities in which they are located. Mix those uses, but you don't have to mix them in one building. In the United States, we tend to do that. We stack them all in one building or make a big mixed use. But you don't have to do that. Just make it walkable in between. But above all, make a place. You recall my first slide was moving places. So I think of places as an architect that help me move from place to place in my life, connecting the parts of my life. I think of places that move me emotionally and inspire me. And I think as architects in general, we should feel moved to action to create great places that are good for our communities and our nations. Thank you.